Thousands of people packed into massive stadiums, some arriving in wheelchairs, others carrying medical reports, many simply holding on to hope. On stage stood a man dressed in a bright suit, speaking with absolute certainty that miracles were about to happen. As the music swelled and the crowd watched in silence, people began to fall, some weeping, others shouting that their pain had vanished. For decades, moments like these defined the global ministry of Benny Hinn, one of the most famous and controversial televangelists in modern religious history. His story is not just about faith and healing. It is also about media power, money, influence, and the growing debate over accountability in global religious movements. Before going further into this story, take a second to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future reports that explore stories shaping faith, culture, and society. The rise of Benny Hinn into a worldwide religious figure began long before stadiums filled with tens of thousands of people. Born in Israel and later moving to North America, Hinn started preaching in small church gatherings during the 1970s. In those early years, few could have predicted that he would eventually become one of the most recognized televangelists on the planet. What set him apart from many preachers at the time was his intense focus on divine healing. Hinn spoke frequently about miracles, claiming that faith could unlock supernatural power capable of curing disease and transforming lives. As word of his healing services spread, crowds began to grow. Small church meetings soon turned into large revival gatherings. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Hinn's ministry had expanded far beyond local congregations. He began organizing massive events known as miracle crusades, where thousands of people gathered in arenas and stadiums to witness what they believed were real-time acts of divine healing. These events were not limited to one country. Hinn traveled across the United States, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, often drawing enormous crowds wherever he went. In many cities, the venues were filled to capacity. Supporters saw him as a vessel through which God's healing power flowed. For them, these gatherings were not simply religious meetings, they were moments of spiritual breakthrough. The rapid expansion of his crusades helped establish Hinn as a central figure within the charismatic Christian movement, and his name quickly became known far beyond church circles. One of the most important forces behind Hinn's global influence was television. His program, This Is Your Day, became a powerful tool for spreading his message to audiences around the world. At a time when satellite broadcasting was expanding rapidly, the show began reaching millions of households across continents. The format was simple but compelling. Episodes often included clips from miracle crusades, testimonies from people who claimed they had been healed, sermons about faith and miracles, and emotional appeals encouraging viewers to believe in the power of God. The program allowed people who had never attended a crusade in person to feel connected to the experience. Viewers in distant countries could watch scenes of large crowds praying, singing, and celebrating supposed healings. For supporters, the broadcast reinforced the belief that miracles were happening on a massive scale. Television also helped shape Hinn's public image. His confident speaking style, dramatic pauses, and commanding presence translated well to the screen. Over time, the program was carried by numerous Christian networks and international broadcasters. This expanded the ministry's reach far beyond physical events, turning Hinn into a recognizable figure across multiple generations of viewers. Through television, his message traveled to places where he had never personally visited, allowing his influence to grow in ways that would have been impossible in earlier decades. The most dramatic expression of Hinn's ministry could be seen during his miracle crusades. These large-scale gatherings became known for moments that many followers described as powerful spiritual encounters. During the services, Hinn would often invite people suffering from illnesses to come forward for prayer. In other moments, he would stretch his hands toward the audience and speak words of healing over the crowd. One of the most widely recognized scenes from these events involved people falling backward after he prayed for them or lightly touched them. Supporters described this as being slain in the spirit, a spiritual experience where individuals are overcome by the presence of God. To those in attendance, the moment felt deeply emotional and sacred. Many people claimed their pain disappeared instantly. Others said they could suddenly move parts of their body that had been immobile for years. These testimonies were often shared publicly during the services, reinforcing the belief that miracles were taking place. At the same time, the dramatic nature of these events attracted skepticism from critics. Some observers questioned whether the environment of intense music, emotional preaching, and large crowds could influence how people interpreted their experiences. Others wondered whether the healings could be medically verified. Despite these questions, the spectacle of the Crusades continued to draw massive audiences and remained central to Hinn's reputation as a global faith healer. Behind the scenes, however, running a worldwide ministry required significant financial resources. Organizing international crusades, producing television programs, and maintaining large administrative operations involved enormous costs. Like many large religious organizations, Hinn's ministry relied heavily on donations from supporters. Viewers of the television program were frequently invited to contribute financially, often through phone lines, mailing campaigns, or online giving. The ministry also maintained extensive mailing lists, sending letters and fundraising appeals to followers who had previously donated. In addition, religious products such as books, teaching materials, and recorded sermons were offered to supporters who wanted to deepen their faith while supporting the ministry's work. For many believers, giving money was considered an act of spiritual partnership. They believed their donations helped spread the message of healing and hope around the world. Critics, however, argued that the fundraising methods used by large televangelist ministries blurred the line between spiritual teaching and financial solicitation. Questions began to emerge about how much money was being raised and how those funds were being managed. While supporters viewed the ministry's growth as evidence of divine blessing, others believed the financial structure deserved closer examination. As Hinn's influence grew, public attention increasingly turned to his personal lifestyle. Reports surfaced describing expensive homes, luxury travel, and the use of private aircraft. Critics argued that these displays of wealth appeared inconsistent with the spiritual message often preached from the stage. They questioned whether donations from ordinary believers were helping fund an extravagant lifestyle. The debate touched on a broader issue within modern televangelism: how religious leaders manage large financial empires built on public support. Supporters defended Hinn, pointing out that many successful organizations operate on large budgets and that international ministries naturally require significant resources. They also argued that critics often misunderstood the complexity of running a global religious network. Nevertheless, the discussion about wealth and lifestyle continued to follow Hinn's ministry for years, becoming one of the most persistent controversies surrounding his public image. The issue of financial transparency eventually reached the attention of lawmakers in the United States. In 2010, Chuck Grassley, a U.S. senator, launched an investigation into several prominent televangelists. The inquiry focused on whether religious ministries were using donor funds responsibly and whether they were providing sufficient financial transparency to supporters. Hinn was among the ministers included in the investigation. Lawmakers requested information about spending practices, compensation structures, and how donations were being distributed within these organizations. The investigation sparked a national conversation about the oversight of large religious ministries. While some critics believed stronger regulation was necessary, others argued that government involvement in religious institutions should remain limited. The inquiry did not result in sweeping reforms, but it highlighted the growing concern among the public about accountability in organizations that receive millions of dollars in donations. At the same time, investigative journalists began examining some of the healing claims made during miracle crusades. Documentaries and reports explored cases where individuals had publicly declared they were healed during services, but later continued to struggle with illness. In some heartbreaking situations, people who believed they had experienced miraculous recovery reportedly died from the same diseases months or years later. These reports raised difficult questions about how healing testimonies were verified before being presented to large audiences. Supporters responded by saying that faith healing operates within a spiritual framework that cannot always be measured by medical standards. Critics, however, argued that public claims of miraculous cures should be backed by clear evidence, especially when those claims inspire vulnerable individuals to place their hopes in supernatural healing. The debate intensified when criticism came from within Hinn's own extended family. His nephew, Costi Hinn, later became a vocal critic of the prosperity gospel movement. In his book God, Greed, and the Prosperity Gospel, he described growing up within the environment of a high-profile televangelist ministry. Costi Hinn argued that some prosperity teachings placed too much emphasis on financial blessing and personal wealth as signs of faith. Because his perspective came from someone who had witnessed the inner workings of the ministry firsthand, his criticism attracted widespread attention. For supporters of Benny Hinn, the book represented a painful family disagreement. For critics of prosperity theology, it offered confirmation of concerns that had been raised for years. Then came an unexpected moment that reignited the conversation. In 2019, Benny Hinn publicly stated that the prosperity gospel had gone too far. During a broadcast, he suggested that constant fundraising and promises of financial miracles had become excessive in parts of the movement. The statement surprised many observers who had long associated him with prosperity preaching. Some people interpreted his comments as a genuine shift in perspective, believing that he was reconsidering aspects of his theology after decades in ministry. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether the remarks would lead to meaningful changes in the way the ministry operated. In the years that followed, debate continued about whether those statements resulted in real transformation. Critics argued that the overall structure of the ministry, including fundraising campaigns and televised appeals, appeared largely unchanged. Supporters countered that personal reflection often unfolds gradually and that meaningful reform takes time. The disagreement reflects a broader tension within modern religious movements, the challenge of balancing spiritual authority, financial transparency, and public accountability. Ultimately, the story of Benny Hinn serves as a powerful case study in the complex world of modern televangelism. His ministry inspired millions who believed they witnessed genuine miracles and life-changing moments of faith. At the same time, it sparked serious questions about healing claims, wealth within religious leadership, the influence of donor money, and the need for transparency in large ministries. The discussion surrounding his work continues to shape how people think about faith healing and prosperity preaching in the 21st century. If you want more in-depth reports exploring stories like this, consider subscribing so you never miss future uploads.